Ciao everyone and welcome to this new episode of Voices of Italy. Today we're gonna talk about a Danish movie. And no, you didn't click on the wrong episode or the wrong podcast. This is not Voices of Denmark. But this movie really left a great impression on me, and I thought it was a precious opportunity to tell you something about Italian culture that probably sounds a little bit like cliche, but is not really a cliche. I'll give you just a quick pitch. The protagonist is Theo Dahl, a Danish chef who flies to Italy to settle his late father's rundown estate. This is nothing more than a business trip to him, but it will end up changing his approach to life and love forever. The movie checks a lot of the boxes of the Netflix set in Italy rom com. So you have picturesque landscapes, olive groves, rustic farm life vibes, and of course, the inevitable romantic Vespa ride. However, Toscana rings truer than your average Italy set rom com, and it gets you a lot of those genuine glimpses of a small village life and a delightful cultural clash of Danish efficiency and Italian sprezzatura, a word that even I learned through this movie. So if you listen to episode 5 on Netflix movie La Dolce Vita and loved it, you'll like this episode as well. And you'll thank me for saving you a lot of scrolling time to pick something to watch tonight. Italy is one of the most iconic countries in the world. But what does Italy mean to the world? What does it mean to you?
Buongiorno.
Pizza.
Ciao Bella.
Michelangelo.
Spaghetti.
Mafia.
Dolce Vita.
My name is Alessia, I'm Italian, and this is Voices of Italy, the podcast that peels back the layers of the Instagram perfect Italy to reveal everyday stories of authentic, surprising, and messy Italian life. Let's start with saying that this is a Netflix original movie, and I was really surprised to see that it was the first Danish original movie ever made. So it was quite peculiar to see that it was set in Italy, and it's quite different than La Dolce Vita, the movie that I covered in episode 5 of this podcast, for basically everything. It's really different in terms of how it tries to deliver that Italian experience to the audience. Theodal, the protagonist, is a by the book Danish chef. He inherits his estranged father's rustic estate called Ristonchi, which is in Tuscany. He arrives there just wanting to get it done, sell the property as soon as possible. He doesn't have good memories of his father. On the contrary, he's completely a stranger to him, abandoned him and his mother. So again, he wants to get rid of everything that belonged to him as soon as possible. Not only that, when he arrives in Italy, he finds a bunch of annoyances on his way. So unfortunately for him, the selling process looks like it's going to be much longer than what he expected. But the reason why I want to talk about this movie is because even for me, that I usually like to watch this kind of movies to sort of catch those cliches and stereotypes that make me think of how other countries see Italy, for the good and for the bad, of course. But I like to sort of reflect on those cliches and see what that says about the Italian culture and society, how it's perceived abroad. And I was surprised to see that this movie really moved me and really made me feel closer to my country and my culture, because it really managed to show certain aspect of the Italian approach to life and food and love in a way that is not over flattering, is not glamorous and shiny. Don't get me wrong, the movie has those romanticized moments, but again, it's a product of entertainment. Nobody's expecting a documentary here. The tone, as I was saying, is willingly light, romantic, sprinkled with that passion for food that you would expect in a movie like this. Food is really a huge focus, as it is in real life for Italian, of course. So this is not an exaggeration, but rather than a predictable collection of cliché, Toscana feels more like a love letter to the Italian lifestyle and to our relationship with family heritage. If I had to really go and be super picky and annoying here, I can already tell you the two things that I found not so true, or really like that I found not so true and realistic. For example, one of the earliest scenes when Theo arrives in Italy, he's calling the lawyer that is helping him handle the estate situation, and is one of the other main protagonists of their movie. The name is Pino. And he calls him on the phone and he doesn't pick up. So he leaves a message, a voicemail message. I'm telling you, nobody uses voicemail messages in Italy. And that's simply because Italian phone services are actually extremely cheap. I think, really, at least compared to other European countries, because of the huge amount of operators in the market, and nobody pays for voicemail service. I've really never seen nobody using that in my entire life. And again, that's because I'm really trying to be picky here. And the other thing is the romantic Vespa ride that is really inevitable in this kind of movies. I have to admit, it looks pretty, and it makes me, even me, makes me want to go there and rent a Vespa just to ride in the hills of Tuscany for one day. Really pretty, really romantic. And I cannot tell you how common it is. I just know that if you walk in the street of any Italian city, you will not see so many Vespas. You will not see so many people happily riding them towards the sun, you know? That's just not a thing, but it's really nice to see, I guess. What is really interesting from the movie, though, is this sort of cultural clash that emerges between the Danish efficiency and the Italian sprezzatura. And I would like to start with this word because it's a word that I simply didn't know before this movie. I really felt quite dumb. Apparently, sprezzatura describes an attitude that externally just looks like this pleasant, spontaneous, natural, genuine attitude. When someone makes things look really effortless and easy and natural, but that's more of an appearance, as if someone is trying to maintain really a nonchalant demeanor in general. And I'm not really sure that an English translation even exists. I tried to look it up, but it's just an Italian word. And I completely understand what it refers to. And it opened a door in my brain to how well it describes a really widespread attitude that us Italians have. We make everything look slow and easy, and we really say very often esagerato when someone tries to be over precise or very efficient, as if, we find that too much. But it's not like we don't want to be like that, it's just a way to set the mood in a relaxed way without adding stress on people, because efficiency, or the idea of efficiency, might add a little bit of a layer of stress. But the idea, I think, behind it is that it's an appearance, it's an attitude. And what I would like sometimes foreigners to understand is that Italians are not necessarily that relaxed, so careless about things. However, we feel comfortable when people look that way, when people feel that way, when other people around us are not stressed. And I feel like this word really is going to be my to go word when I'm going to try to explain this kind of attitude to people in the future. It's really difficult to describe because I think it's true for a lot of situations, a lot of people, different age, different social classes. It's just a widespread attitude. Don't rush me. Don't tell me to do things a little faster. Don't chase me to do things a little better. The time is gonna come spontaneously. Even in a business relationship, you might wanna, get to the point and get to a deal. And maybe the Italian person that you're talking to instead, adds another coffee to your agenda before you go to the point. And that's something that actually happens in the movie as well. In one of the earliest scenes where Theo is trying to convince another character, the name is Luca, this older man that seems to be interested in purchasing the property. And Theo is trying to convince him of the value of the property because he has already observed the potential. So the place, how pretty it is, the surroundings. He sees the potential from a business point of view. He's already thinking how to make it more efficient, how to make it more prestigious, more his style, how he's used to do things, and he's convinced that he can make the property profitable. So he tries to describe that to Luca, and he tries to convince him that he has more than enough reasons to believe that the property can be profitable. He tries to already kind of reach a deal. He tries to shake his hand. And, in that moment, everybody is enjoying a drink, everybody's there enjoying the property. The conversation is happening between Theo, Luca, and the lawyer that I was mentioning before. And while Theo is trying to reach a deal, go to the point, shake his hand, and kind of going somewhere, Pino and Luca keep switching the conversation to Italian and keep talking about their wives, about, oh, what is she gonna say? And Pino keeps adding stuff to the conversation that is not really pragmatic, is not really relevant to how the property again is gonna be turned profitable, which is what Theo is trying to do. So at the end, there's kind of a resemblance of a deal at the end of this conversation. But that scene, I think, is very, very, very well written, because there is this clash between how Theo is trying to lead the conversation to, step by step, something structured. Look, have observed how things are here. I see how we could make improvements, and I'm being very practical to you and telling you what I'm gonna do before you can buy the company and have it basically already running and making money. And even then, the people that he's talking to don't seem to feel comfortable already shaking his hand and making a deal. And that's something that is part of the entire movie. At the beginning, Theo really struggles with this attitude, and the entire movie he kind of tries to understand why and get used to it, even though at the beginning it's quite difficult, because to him it just feels extremely inefficient, extremely embarrassing, and just low quality kind of work. For Theo, this is also a matter of work ethic. In a way, he really goes there and just sees a bunch of inefficiencies, a bunch of things that are maybe for him and someone with this background just a sign of neglect and laziness, and he just can't stand it. And I think it's really part of that attitude that I was trying to describe before. You can go to any Italian restaurant, and unless you're talking about a higher tier, a higher level luxury restaurant, where of course the service and everything is run in a certain way to also be able to get that sort of status, to get that luxury status for the business. In any other case, from the really the more normal street food place to the average restaurant that you can find, the quality of the service, the level of the service always has those imperfections. I cannot deny it. Now, after being with my partner, with my boyfriend for a couple of years now, and talking and seeing Italy with him, visiting a lot of places, and seeing how different for him as an American it is to experience Italian hospitality, Italian service, I think this is extremely clear to me. There's a huge difference between the warmth and the hospitality that people talk about when talking about Italy, which is there, and talking about good customer service, which is something entirely different. And my experience, especially North Americans tend to have this expectation because they have a background of customer service that is completely different than the style that you find here. And there is this scene in the movie. It's one of the earliest scenes when Theo arrives in Italy and directly goes to the estate, to the property, as a normal customer. He just sits down as a normal customer, and the waitress in their case is the co-protagonist of the movie, the romantic interest. In this case, the name of the character is Sophia. And Theo immediately has a bad impression and a bad feeling regarding the profitability of the whole thing from that one experience. He sits down, the table is not stable, which immediately annoys him. He asks for water from the bottle, which they bring it to him, but then they pour the water in a glass that already has ice in it. And he is completely outraged by that fact because the water from the bottle gets mixed with the ice, which, by the way, I'm not gonna lie, I had to rewatch that scene twice to understand why he was complaining. I watched this movie with my boyfriend and I was like, okay, give me your straightforward understanding. Why do you think he's getting annoyed? And he goes, well, for me, it's super obvious because I'm paying for this super expensive bottled water, Italian bottled water, and you guys pour it in a glass with ice that who knows where it comes from, and it's getting mixed with my expensive Italian water. It dawned on me, maybe because, again, I'm not obviously in the restoration industry, in the hospitality industry. So maybe what I'm saying is really basic for someone that works in that field. But as an Italian, I would have never had that expectation in the first place. You know, like if you are already giving me bottled water, it doesn't really have for me more value than non bottled water. Maybe because in Italy, we're very used, it's very normal for water to be drinkable. Even the one that you have in the sink is technically drinkable, even though a lot of people don't trust it and still buy bottled water. But what I'm trying to say here is that I didn't even have that expectation. It really took me a few minutes of thinking to understand why he was even finding that point, something negative in the service. And then the service, obviously, he finds it particularly rude, and it is particularly rude because Sophia, who doesn't know who he is at that point, keeps having that annoyed face, annoyed attitude when she sees that he's not happy with how the service is going. And she starts switching her speech too, from moments where she's speaking English to him and to silently mumble of how annoying is being. And why I'm mentioning this is that, honestly, I've seen a lot of very bad service in my experience that doesn't make that scene sound so exaggerated, doesn't make that scene sound all crazy. They're just depicting this because, they want to show this passionate Italian woman stereotype. No, guys, I've had plenty of that rudeness, plenty of waiters and people working in hospitality sort of not hiding how annoyed they are to customers. And I was actually talking about that a few days ago with another Italian girl who is in a couple with an American man. And one of the things that he noticed here in Italy is how service is different, how people are so explicitly unhappy of their job. And while talking to them, we realized that we have normalized this sort of unhappiness, this sort of hospitality and customer service is really hard and people make it so difficult, so I'm sort of justified if I'm like a little grumpy and if I give you that little annoyed response while I'm serving you, I'm not your slave kind of thing, which is inconceivable for someone that, for example, is American, is used to something completely different. Is, I think, is really inconceivable. And coming back to that scene when Theo first sits down and experiences the restaurant, another thing that he seems to immediately dislike is the food, which is something that you don't think you would see in a Netflix original movie set in Italy. You would think that he gets the plate and his eyes turn into heart-shaped eyes, and he immediately sees that as a little bit of a plate of art. But no, at the beginning, he really looks sort of disgusted. He gets this tomato mozzarella salad, and the waiter also comes back and pours a little bit of olive oil on a small little plate as a side. There is this zoom on the salad that makes you even think, ooh, that doesn't look appetizing at all. And it's not pretty, it's not structured, it's not layered. It really looks like they just put the ingredients in a plate and served it to him as you would serve it in your own home in a lazy day. For him, this in a restaurant, no matter the quality, no matter the kind of restaurant, for him, this seems to be really basic. Things start changing when he decides to take a little piece of bread and put it in the olive oil and taste it. This is the first time where he opens his eyes and seems to say, this taste is amazing, to the point that then he goes back to the oil with his own finger to taste the oil in pureness, let's say, and he finds it clearly incredible. So he keeps finding these elements in the food, in the property, in the landscape that he finds amazing, but he starts discovering this inefficiency in how things are used. He sees a lot of potential and a lot of passion, but there's no business structure, there's no business direction. And that's the reason why, despite all this, despite the quality of the food, of the ingredients, despite the beauty of the scenery, the business is not going well. And I think that's something that you can see in a lot of places in Italy. Going around with non-Italians in touristy places, I've noticed that actually, yes, there's a lot of places in very famous touristy spots that you would expect to be, I'm not saying obviously necessarily luxurious or super high level, but you would expect it to be, nice looking and well maintained. And sometimes those places in those very touristy spots can be the ugliest, can be the ones that really look more neglected. And that's something that in my Italian slash Sicilian mind, it's always been really obvious, but it's difficult to explain to foreigners. And I probably can best describe it as just saying those places can afford to be lazy. They already have the beautiful surroundings, the food. I have to say, maybe that can be considered a stereotype, but even the more, lower level kind of food that you can get is not terrible, let's be honest. So they can sort of afford to be lazy, because when you have a spot like that, when you have a place where people are just gonna stop because of how pretty the scenery is, and you want to enjoy the moment, and they're gonna have that, kind of regular flux of clients, sort of discourages businesses from elevating themselves, from repainting the walls and cleaning up the graffiti from the wall, and adding elements to the menu, or even having a menu, because yes, you can find a lot of businesses that don't even have a menu to show to tourists. And for those of you that have been maybe in super mega touristy places like Milan, that's not what I'm referring to, because those places kind of adapt to the tourist, even they had to. But in any other place in Italy, from small towns to kind of average bigger places like Turin here, you don't find that adaptability. There's a lot of places that you can see sort of just don't try that much because they don't have to. And it kind of reconnects to the sprezzatura idea to me, because it makes it look effortless but great. The food is great, the place is great, but it doesn't seem like they're trying that hard, and they're probably are not in the sense that those people are not hardworking, or they're not putting passion or work in what they do, but they don't go to what they consider to be the extra level, that extra that is not necessary for them to get clients, if you know what I mean. It's not absolutely fundamental for them to keep going. It's really just an extra, so they don't do it. And that's kind of what you see in the movie when Theo goes around and goes in the kitchen, and he just wants a sandwich at that point, and he makes for himself this sandwich that for common mortals like me and you is like a work of art. He makes this eggplants cheese sandwich that just looks divine. And for him, that's absolutely the basic. He does that real quick, but before making the sandwich, he kind of cleans up the kitchen, he makes it up to his standard. And that's something that happens a lot in the movie, especially in the first part. Another thing that I thought in the movie was really well done is the idea of farm to the table kind of food. Every crop, every piece of food, every ingredient comes from that property, what is produced in that property. And Italians, we value that so much. Italians cherish really the concept of chilometro zero, 0 kilometers. It's a phrase that is used to describe food that is really local, that essentially what it means is so close that it comes from less than a kilometer away from, the final place where you are buying it, the grocery store where you are buying it, which is obviously not always the case. I'm not saying that all the food that we have here is coming from less than a kilometer away, but it's a very well used phrase that food brands use to market themselves, to deliver the idea that it's local. It doesn't come from a faraway country. It doesn't come from, anything produced chemically, anything produced elsewhere. It comes from the Italian countryside, really next to you kind of situation. And for us, it really translates into not only quality, but sort of supporting your territory, supporting the places that you come from, supporting the people that are working in the fields. And it's something that culturally has a lot of value. In the movie, I think they pass that on really well. There's a moment where Theo is looking at a book, a recipe book that his father kept there in the property. Sophia shares it with him, and she clearly tells him that there's no recipe in that book that includes ingredients that he cannot find there in the property produced there, which is honestly very realistic. That might as well be the case, obviously, not just for an idealistic reason, but for pragmatic financial convenience also. If you self-produce, especially at places like agriturismo, those farms that are also restaurants slash hotels, sometimes they kind of have this kind of business that's really really common nowadays. But in any case, it's both true for those kind of businesses, but also for the kind of food that Italians want and like to have. It's sort of the authenticity that we expect. So maybe not necessarily the recipe has to be super traditional, but the ingredient, I would like to have that ingredient. Now, again, it doesn't mean that we all eat something that is produced, within our area. At the end of the day, people buy what they buy, but definitely it's a very, very marketed and marketable concept here. And I liked the scene that I was mentioning before when Theo tastes the olive oil that is being put aside on a little plate, and he from that really has this enlightenment on how good the products are. And that specific example, the olive oil, I think it's perfect to sort of represent that in a movie, because fresh pressed oil drizzled raw on bread and salads, that's something that is super common and it's usually considered really good by Italians. I have a friend from Tuscany that I was actually talking just yesterday about this. She told me something that I didn't know. She said it's very normal for people in Tuscany to have sort of family and friends get together when there is the olio nuovo, the new oil ready, to share and enjoy together. And I found this super, super nice. And I don't really have that kind of experience, inviting people over to taste the new oil. But what I can tell you is that where I come from, in Sicily, we also always had oil really super local, produced by people that I know in places that I see. That's something that I've never really considered, maybe wrongfully in this case. I have to say I'm a little Italian brat maybe, but I've never really considered that super luxurious, super beautiful, because I just had it there, very close to me. And now I've been living away from Sicily for a few years. I think around 7 years I've been here in Turin, and my parents send me fresh olive oil every 6 months, more or less, bottled up. And I never bought olive oil in the grocery store. This is just to tell you that olive oil, especially fresh olive oil, it's really one of those products that represents the quality of the food that Italians expect, and that gives you the idea. Another thing that I really appreciated about the movie is their language choices. Obviously, let's be honest, this kind of movies can't be really authentic. Otherwise, every Italian person in that movie would have this strong Tuscany accent that at times even Italians might struggle to understand. So I'm not expecting, obviously, that level of authenticity here. But I really appreciated that even the people in the movie that can speak English, it has to be the way. Otherwise, it would be impossible to have a movie for an international audience. Even though that's probably not realistic that so many people speak English, even in a touristy region like Tuscany. However, at least their English is a believable English. Luca, the investor that is interested in purchasing the property, he speaks English, but in a realistic way. He sort of has that Italianized English. It doesn't necessarily say things right. It's very understandable, but it sounds genuine. It sounds spontaneous. And that was really nice to see in the movie because, obviously, as I was saying, even in touristy places like Tuscany, unless you go to Florence, unless you go to the restaurant where all the waiters are speaking English, then you will not find it that easily. Maybe basic words, and that's fine, like giving you a little bit of directions, tell you yes and thank you, that kind of thing. But that's the fluency that you can expect. And it was nice to see that they managed to handle really well that kind of conversation, especially because the characters often kind of switch Italian and English, and even Theo speaks Danish here and there. I think it really delivers the idea different from, for example, from what you can see in a movie like La Dolce Vita, where everybody has a much more really, really fake kind of level of English, that super clean kind of English with just that little touch of an Italian accent to make it sound cute for foreigners. Besides the kind of sense of business and work ethic and slow versus fast kind of pace, the other big topic, in my opinion, of this movie is family heritage, family roots. Again, Theo goes there not even being interested in kind of looking at what his father's built, what he did over there, to even see what he experienced before passing away. He has nothing of that in mind, while all the other people that he finds in the property sort of constantly remind him of the importance of those things. Sophia sort of considers Theo's father like her own father, and she cares deeply about how the property is, no matter how imperfect it is, no matter how inefficient things are. For her, those things remind her of him, and that makes it precious. And sometimes that's really how it is. I'm not saying that everything is that romantic, but we sort of have that attachment no matter how ugly they may sound to other people. In my own case, coming from Sicily, coming from, unfortunately, a part of Italy that is not economically developed, that has a lot of problems, a lot of infrastructures missing, a lot of really systematic issues. But sometimes it sort of makes you want to defend it. It sort of makes you want to cherish it even more because of how that beauty, that fondness that you have for the things that your family did, for the places where your family comes from. And despite, all the problems, it still comes out. You still have that fondness for it. So in a way, I really felt for Sophia, for her character. It's like she sees this super efficient Danish robot coming to her home and judging and wanting to change things that she loves and that she has a lot of memories connected to. So I think a lot of people would actually react like that at the beginning, like Sophia's character did, like sort of rejecting that judgment, even though she sees that the property has problems. She has financial problems. She can't even afford her own wedding. She can't even afford to have people hired for bigger events and services. So she sees that there's a problem, there's a flaw in the way things are, but she can't detach herself from the fondness that she has for the place. And in general, the entire community greets Theo like kin. He may have been away his entire life. The locals remember his father's legacy, remember him as he was a kid when he spent some time in Tuscany. This really echoes the Italian concept of campanilismo, which is basically loyalty to one's town or general area. Maybe family heritage isn't just that, it's really part of your identity as you grow up. And when I first came here in Turin, I've always introduced myself as a Sicilian person. You know, it's one of the first things that I say about myself. I don't even expect obviously anything from it. Is just part of who I am. My family is part of who I am. We grow up really with that identity that sort of merges with our family. And obviously, that's common to a lot of cultures. But Italian culture is really particularly family centric, and that translates into this strong attachment we have to our roots, to our home, our original belonging. Everybody welcomes Theo as he never left because of how much they loved his father, and consequently they feel the duty to behave in a certain way with him. This even comes up in a conversation at the end of the movie. Little spoiler here for who doesn't want to know how the movie goes, even though, come on, guys, this is not a super complicated movie. I think from the first 5 minutes, we all know how the ending is going to be. But still, I'm warning you, this is a spoiler of how it goes. In the end, Theo sort of initially rejects his heritage. Things don't go well with his romantic interests. So he just goes back to Denmark. But then he has a change of heart, and he goes back and wants to repurchase the estate, even though he had already sold it to Luca. And he buys it for basically double the price that initially sold it for. Like basically, Luca in the end gets a really nice deal of 1.5 million for the property. But the reason why I'm telling you this is that there is this line where Luca says, well, I don't want to be in the middle of you and your family heritage. And I think is not the intent of that line in the movie is not to be ironic. He's obviously probably really happy that he's getting 1.5 million. But at the same time, even if we wanted to say no, because now he has a property that has been basically renovated and things are much more profitable now, so he could make even more money in the long run. But he doesn't have the heart to say no, because he sees why Theo came back and is willing to pay all those money. It's because of family, because that's what the whole movie is about, this learning journey for Theo that comes thinking in a very business oriented way, thinking of making profits, thinking of career progression, and learns instead that sometimes there are things that are not pragmatically that convenient but make you feel better. And that's the spirit that a lot of people have in Italy. I have to be honest, I do not always agree with that kind of attitude. I embrace it every time that I can, but it's not always something that I love. I find myself a lot of times speaking with Italians that left Italy, or Italians that are thinking of leaving Italy, or Italians that stayed and that, proudly kind of talk about that choice. A lot of them, I have to say, it's like they try in those conversations to justify their choices. And without any doubt, I can tell you that the justification, the reasons behind that choice to stay usually sums up to three elements: food, landscape, so the beach or the mountain, whatever, and family. Those are the three things that every Italian would mention whenever they talk about why they stay, why they don't leave. Because, yeah, that's a question. There was an entire episode of the podcast dedicated to the topic of Italian leaving in episode 7. If you want to hear more about this to understand why this is such an obvious topic of conversation, you can go listen to episode 7 talking about the reality of young Italians today. But again, those are the three elements that people usually mention. The thing is that if you look at the numbers, if you look at how many Italians are leaving, how that number sort of progressively grows in time, and it really tells you that those three elements that we love so much, that we are so known for, that we are sometimes so envied by foreigners for. Oh, I would never leave Italy. I would love to have that kind of food every day. I would love to have that kind of landscape every day. The art, the culture, and the profound attachment to family is something that is very admired as well. But it breaks my heart to say that clearly that's not enough. enough, and it shouldn't be enough. I think it's legitimate that we all have a higher expectation from the country that we live in. I think it's very hard to explain if you're not Italian, especially if you're not, between the age of 20 and 35, which is usually the age group that is more penalized by the situation. But it's incredible that a movie that I had zero expectations for sort of started this internal conversation with myself about these topics, because it's that sort of battle between this love for your tradition and your territory, and the lack, unfortunately, of productivity and efficiency that comes with it sometimes, which is a widespread problem in Italy. And at the end of the day, the movie ends really well with Theo sort of learning to balance those elements, learning to kind of let go a little bit, to enjoy the moment, to not to be so precise and business oriented all the time, to give value to other stuff that are not necessarily, pragmatically or career wise the best thing to do, but that will make you happy because they're parts of life that, have really no price. And that's something that I think it's close to all of our hearts, regardless if you're Italian or not. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, life is not a Netflix movie. However, that's definitely a nice way to see it. I guess maybe we all need Danish visitors sort of coming in and helping us with balancing our Dolce Vita lifestyle with a tiny bit more of Danish efficiency. And in fact, even our Sophia, that seems at the beginning so unremovable from her initial position, from dedicating her entire life to Theo's father's estate and work as if that was her primary duty, ends up sort of changing perspective, sort of admitting that there's more in life than your family duty. There's more in life than the priceless things that, are part of your home. You're entitled to have your own path. You're entitled to going out there and finding something that is precious for your own, even if that's career, related. That's something that is legitimate to do. That's what Sophia on her side learns. And she, at the end of the movie, goes back to Theo saying, I finally stepped up and I finally decided to go to university, because during the movie we learned that she has a passion for botanics that she never decided to explore, because her entire life was dedicated to taking care of family, taking care of the estate. And that's true in Italy, I have to say, especially for a lot of women, maybe more than men. But it really depends on the region and on a series of other complex considerations, of course. But that dedication to family first sometimes gets in the way of your individual ambition, and that can be a thing. Or sometimes instead can give you that sort of comfort that, you have your family business and that's just easier. You don't really have to go out there and find another purpose for your life. There's a lot of family run businesses, especially small and medium businesses. They are the foundation of Italian economy in general. And yeah, there's this mix of sense of duty slash that's the easiest way for you to get a living, because other choices are more of a risk. And Italians, I have to say, we are very risk adverse. So if your family already has a business, it's very common that you just work on that. But I would love to know, what do you feel if you watched Toscana? Did that really resonate with you as well, or it just made you roll your eyes? Did you listen to the episode about La Dolce Villa? Did you watch both movies? And what did you think? I would love to hear your opinions. You can text me on Instagram at Voices of Italy, or leaving me a voice message is also very much appreciated. You might be included in one of the next episodes. You can send me messages with suggestions on what you would like to hear in the podcast, or comments about previous episodes. Everything is very welcomed. Thank you so much much for listening to this episode, and see you in the next one. If you want to follow up to this episode's sort of love for genuine food and local food, I totally suggest you to find a way to watch Slow Food Story. It's a documentary from 2013 and follows Carlo Petrini, the founder of the slow food movement, born here nearby in Piemonte, in Bra. It's a funny and inspiring insight into Italy's resistance to fast food and love for what we have now, yes, called commonly slow food.